Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 14. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank those of you who have liked, shared, and subscribed and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. I also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength, for bringing you this episode for free today. Cerberus is an organization that truly puts the athletes first and actively works towards providing the best quality gear at an affordable price. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus has quickly evolved into a global brand symbolizing quality and trust. Their ever-growing product range is used by the top athletes around the world at the highest level of competition, and every single Cerberus Strength product has been designed with performance in mind, with the highest attention to detail. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use our promo code STRENGTH_game to receive an extra 10% off your next order. That's strength_game. So in this week's episode, I'm excited. I'm joined by doctor and sport data scientist Jack Rummells. Jack has recently finished his PhD defense, earning his doctorate in biomedical engineering from the University of Iowa. Prior to this dissertation studies and his experience as a sports scientist, he's also spent time as a graduate research assistant for virtual soldier research and the University of Northern Iowa. He's been a personal trainer at the University of Iowa, as well as a sports performance coach at ProFit Gym, Got Strength Gym, and the University of Northern Iowa, working with the volleyball and football programs. Jack has a very extensive athletic background, including 7 years of competitive experience in Olympic weightlifting on the local, state, and national level in the 105 plus division, in addition to several strongman competitions under his belt. Following a successful 5-year collegiate football career as a lineman at the University of Northern Iowa, he had a stint as a professional football player, earning himself a spot on the Jacksonville Jaguars squad following a 3-day minicamp in 2015. Now retired from football, Jack has found new ways to continue to test himself mentally and physically with his own training through cycling, strength training, and other adventure sports, all while continuing to work on his research. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Dr. Jack Rummells. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm excited. I'm joined by a fellow friend of mine, a new friend recommended very highly, and new Dr. Jack Rummells. I'm excited to have you on today, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. This is an awesome opportunity.
Hey, like I said, first off, I really want to congratulate you. I know you just defended your dissertation, and I was thumbing through it. It's a little beyond my reading comprehension, but I loved every bit of it. And the athlete modeling and the monitoring tool, I think that's great. So congrats on your doctorate.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a good ending. It's tough, at least coming from the sports perspective where like most people's last football game ends in a loss. So like, it can never be like a bright and shining moment, but like I was really happy with my defense, and that went really just as I pictured it.
That's awesome, man. Hey, well, I want to get right into it. I know you did a lot of stuff growing up and like lifting when you first started, leading up to your point now. So kind of get into it a little bit. How'd you get started in the strength game? What'd you play growing up? And then kind of what's your athletic path looked like up until now?
Yeah. I had a lot of things going on in my youth for sports. I think it all started though with my dad. He was he was the assistant head football coach for West Branch High School for 28 years. And so, you know, just as I got to an age where, you know, like I needed to be watched after school, I would go to football practice and hang around with, you know, the high school football players. And so, you know, like just from that, like I got a love for football, I guess. Like, you know, it's not like people were force feeding it, but just being around it and being in that environment was awesome for me. But even going off that, my dad would watch the weight room, you know, as old school people did before strength coaches. And I would be in there, and I would just, that was my first big experience with strength training. And then honestly, my dad would just kind of hype up these, you know, types of people. I can't think of, but he would talk about this one famous football player that would do 1,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups, you know, a day or something. And like that always inspired me to even just start doing like little calisthenic type, you know, push-up, sit-up routine at home. And that's where it really started. And I kind of had a fire going into that, but just crap technique without anybody's supervision. And then when I was about 12, 13 years old, so just the start of high school, my cousin married Phil Johnson, which is your buddy's brother, Carl Johnson's brother. And so they were living in Arizona, but they moved back about that time. And at that time, I started hanging around Phil, and he became, you know, more than words can describe, my mentor, my big brother type deal. And yeah, he really had a massive impact on kind of the direction I went with strength training and just in life. Like, so I started out with just going over to his house for like strongman Sundays. That was my first thing with him, was strongman Sundays. So in his garage, we pulled out stones, axles, probably even a log, tire flips, car pulls. And so every Sunday-ish, that was our routine, was go lift out in his yard, out of his garage for a couple hours, then go down to Ponchero's burrito shop and fill up on a massive burrito. And so from there, Phil got a private sport performance gym for kind of youth athletes and started training out of there. And throughout the entire, you know, every phase, I was kind of along by his side, because he's really got that cult of personality where you meet him and you're just like, okay, this guy's cool. Like, I want to be around him, sort of deal. So he got his gym and started training people. I just trained as a regular athlete for a while, but then one random day I saw this guy kind of interning for him. And, you know, nothing against the guy, but, you know, the guy's just kind of standing around not knowing what to do. And I'm just thinking like, man, I could coach the crap, you know, compared to this guy. Like, what's this guy got? And so I asked Phil, I'm like, you know, what do I got to do to be in it? He's like, yeah, you got it, man, you know. And so with that, I started coaching, you know, assistant coaching, probably junior year of high school, along with just being infatuated with weightlifting. You know, at least by junior year, it wouldn't be uncommon to be, you know, about 5-6 times a week in his gym. And that's really just due to his atmosphere that he could build. As far as sports goes, so yeah, that kind of carried me through my high school career. But as I was, you know, doing that, I was doing sports, and I started out doing every single sport that you could do with school-aged, you know, stuff. Yeah, basketball. You know, I don't know why I named that first, because I was awful at basketball, even though I'm 6'6". Can have the height, but no skill, no touch. And then football, wrestling, tried it, track, golf. I enjoy golf. I stick with that. but overall, it kind of, started with everything at the beginning of high school. And then as I kind of got in junior, senior year, it dwindled down to just football. And then I even got into competitive weightlifting. So that came in the form of Olympic weightlifting, which was kind of new to, I was with Phil, I think, at his first Olympic weightlifting competition, at least the first one he coached. So it was kind of a new experience for all of us. And then strongman competitions, we got into that too. I did a couple of those along there. And honestly, that was always my favorite form of training. It just felt like kind of that raw, bare bones style, out of, grabbing some dirty, dusty plates and getting strong with it. Like that was something that really fed my passion, I think. Yeah. And then do you want me to get into college, or how do you want me to?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's awesome to kind of hear your experience in that. And I know, like, from personal conversations and just some slight interactions with Phil, like I know that type of person. Carl's the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
So that passion that both of them have for coaching and just for strength sports. And I remember when I interned with Carl, he would go back and forth, like from 12-week programs, or like from strongman to weightlifting to powerlifting. He did everything. And I know Phil was the same way. So that's an awesome person to have, like, under your belt and be involved with for that period of time. But yeah, it's cool to kind of see. And like, yeah, I'd love you if you want to touch on that too. Like, what happened when you got into college? Like, were you continuing to still weightlift? Obviously it's a little bit of different environment where you're at UNI, and it's structured a little bit more. So like, kind of take me through that a little bit, and then post collegiately what you did for football, and then maybe we can touch on a little bit what you're doing now.
For sure. I even remembered a part of, kind of my upbringing that was important with Phil is, so not only were we, into the weightlifting thing, but Phil is into so many outdoor sports. I mean, you from knowing Carl, knows that he's into mountain biking. And not only that, but like climbing, hiking, like any sort of outdoor recreational thing. Like he really, like I already had kind of a hunger to travel and do all that stuff. But like, after being with him, like it really prioritized that thing in my life, is to like have enough time outside of work to still, get those in while you still can, sort of thing. But yeah, kind of the transition now going to college. I even want to say that like one of the whole reasons I got a full ride scholarship to Northern Iowa to play football was, of course it was largely due to the strength development from, Phil's training program. But in addition to that, I 100% distinctly know that Phil created this weightlifting kind of highlight video to go along with my football highlight video. And I sent that out to teams, and that was like the absolute thing that solidified, that offer on the table for me right away, which was amazing. In hindsight, it's amazing. It's like, wow, like that was, I didn't think that would work out so well, but it was like that powerful thing that got me in the door. Through college at Northern Iowa, I played 5 years there. I got redshirted the first year. I came in as a defensive lineman initially at 240 pounds, and left there as an offensive lineman at about 305, 310 pounds. And so that first year, I don't know what happened. Just to feed my ego, I'd like to say that they thought, wow, Jack, you're so good that this defensive line isn't good enough for you. You got to go to the offense with the slow, fat guys. Like, you got to, go shine over there with your skill and your speed. I had no, I had no speed. So but I could block. So I made that transition right away. They told me to gain, 240. They're like, okay, get to 270. I'm like, oh God, like this. I just came from being a fatter kid growing up. I'll be honest. When I was a sophomore in high school, I directly remember, I think I was 260 pounds sophomore year of high school. And so, sophomore year, not a lot of muscle mass built yet. I was pretty, large, but, I had the right hunger for getting stronger and better. And then, I kind of devoted myself a little bit more to thinking about my, body or my diet. And so that kind of influenced that. So basically this freshman year at Northern Iowa, I was kind of conflicted because I was already that fat man, and I kind of, got into being like strong, having a nice looking physique. I'm like getting used to it, all that. And they're like, oh no, you got to, get fat again. I'm like, oh, son of a gun. So I honestly explicitly made myself a promise that, okay, I'll sacrifice this next 4 or 5 years of my life as far as weight gain goes. And I'll I'll serve my purpose on the team, and then I'll lose the weight and have the physique that I want in the future, or, ideally want. So after getting over that kind of mental hurdle, I gained the weight, ate till it hurt, honestly, at about 3 meals a day, ate till it hurt. But quickly got up to 270. I started all 4 years of college football that I was eligible to play. And so, it was worth, quickly gaining that weight, but it wasn't fun at any means. And even when I got to that 270 mark, I promise you, the day I got to that 270 mark, I proudly walked up to my coach. I'm like, hey, coach, I got it. I got that mark. Said, oh, I want you at 300 in the same freaking breath. I'm like, oh, Jesus. Oh, man. Like, but, you stick to it. And eventually, once you get there, honestly, the transition is the hardest part. Once you are at the body weight, it's fairly easy to maintain. But that transition in both directions, getting up and getting down, is like where the stress and hard, difficulty comes from. But yeah, going on to the competing while I'm in college. So I did do Olympic weightlifting competitions throughout my whole college career. And that was just, I didn't train for it really. I just did the standard strength conditioning football training. And luckily, a lot of that was like Olympic lifting based because Jed Smith, my strength coach, he's a great guy. I love him. But he has a huge background in Olympic weightlifting. And he even kind of pulled in Jianping Ma. He was a Chinese national weightlifter back in the 70s, I think. And now he got brought over, and he was coaching up in Waterloo and kind of helping out with like the strength conditioning stuff. And so, yeah, like there was definitely some good motivations to keep Olympic weightlifting going with those kind of influences around me. But I would just kind of pop in, honestly, maybe once a year, twice a year in the off season of my buddies' competitions, or, competitions that Phil Johnson has like, 5 or 6 of his weightlifters going to. I'll go attend and even compete in it. And it was just a great, I wasn't huge on getting any sort of number. I was just kind of in it for the culture of, I had this family, and so it's just a great excuse to go see that family and lift some big weights. And then finally, my last Olympic weightlifting competition was in 2015 at the American Open. It was a good final competition. And I got 10th place in the 105, like the super heavyweight weight class. And I was proud of that. I hit some decent numbers. I can't remember what they were, but, just a great stage to kind of finish it on. And yeah, in addition to that, like that competition, I collected my master's degree thesis work, which was looking at the differences between successful and unsuccessful snatch attempts in American open weightlifters. And so that was, I don't know, it was just a very eventful competition. Let's see. Oh, and so just to kind of finish up that kind of tangent, after football, you know, I did really well through my 5 years. And then I got a opportunity to try out for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that was a 3-day mini camp where they bring in 100 different people, 100 different rookies. And so basically they're trying to fill 5 final spots on their roster. And they bring in 100 different rookies to kind of handpick which ones they want to kind of join the team with it. And after that 3-day mini camp, it was honestly probably one of the hardest, but definitely most rewarding 3-day, you know, kind of event that I did, just because of the kind of parameters around that made it difficult to achieve. And I'll just go into it because I like the story. So yeah, day one, they bring in basically 2 full offenses and defenses. So you're either on the first string or second string. It doesn't really matter. They're just trying to get everybody looks. But for some reason, one of our offensive tackles, 1 out of the 4 offensive tackles were hurt. And then the other offensive tackle didn't even show up or something. So we were down to like, 2 or 3 offensive tackles. And basically, since I was kind of one of the people that they were kind of looking at, they put me in both the first string and the second string lineups. So to put that in context, we would run about 36 play team sections where we would go against the defense. And, you know, this is the rookie mini camp where everybody's trying to fight for 5 freaking positions on a team. And so, you know, and in addition to that, nobody's wearing, you know, anything more than a helmet. So we're in helmets trying to win a position on the team. And so everybody's going pretty dang hard, you know, for helmets only. Like, this is the hardest helmets only sort of thing we've done. And so, yeah, like, we would kind of rotate. So, yeah, the 1s would go in, do their 3-play drive. 2s would go in, do their 3-play drive, and just kind of go back and forth until you get through the 36 plays. So in my situation, with 1 guy injured, I was in every single of the 36 plays besides 3 plays. And even more context, we're in Jacksonville, Florida in May, where we have a heat index of like 110. And so I'm like just a dog, sweating, barely kind of getting, you know, but like, you know, I don't know. You just know that they're watching you. This is the time of pressure. And so you just got to suck it up and just kind of get through it. But like, honestly, after one of those 36 play drives, they give you a 5-minute rest break because of the kind of the sun and heat index. And so during that 5-minute break, I really had to go to the bathroom. And honestly, it was right next to me in this porta potty. It would have been 10-minute walk or 10-step walk over to this porta potty. But I was so dog tired that I was like, oh, do I just pee my pants or do I walk the 10 steps? And, so, you know, luckily I walked the 10 steps. But it was just kind of that level of exhaustion was kind of going through my mind. But, you know, a day later, they tell me I'm on the team. And so just, it was amazing for how that much suffering, it was all worth it. So I love that memory. And then, yeah, for the next about 6 months, I was, you know, on the team, and, you know, there's nothing really, So there's stuff going on for the rookies, kind of throughout that 6 months leading up to the preseason. And so I was, really doing practices throughout the thing. And then during the preseason, I got cut after one of the games. But I got to get in 2 or 3 games, and it was a great experience. I think one interesting thing that you'll probably be interested in is the rate of improvement. It's like I was there for 6 months, but the rate of improvement, I would have wiped the floor with the skill set that I accumulated in that amount of time compared to the last few years of college. And I think one, it's just kind of that natural transition of diminishing returns you get from your coach. It's like, okay, I've kind of built everything I've built from my college coach for the last 5 years. And now having this new coach, and on top of having a new coach, I had an amazing new coach. Doug Marrone is the current head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, but he was just the position coach for me at the time. And I thought, just being around a few really good coaches in my life, namely Phil Johnson and my dad, I immediately clicked with, the values he had while coaching, the depth of knowledge he had. Like, he had such a pedagogy of how to coach, and it stood out to me like so abruptly that it was like, I got to get as much as I can from this guy while, it lasts. But yeah, just kind of did that. One interesting nuance, and I'll go on to the next question soon, but so after I got cut during the preseason, we still kind of had the anticipation of, possibly wanting to continue on. And so I used that opportunity to leverage a way to get to Westside Barbell with Louis Simmons. And I had trained with him once that summer. And, I kind of known him through Phil because, we had gone to the Arnold Classic in Columbus, Ohio, and randomly, snuck into his gym, and he had enough free time to kind of teach us the fundamentals of box squatting, like back in sophomore, junior year of high school. So I'd known of him and really been seeking him out for a while, but this was a great opportunity to train kind of extensively with him. And so I went out to Westside for the next month to train. And it was an amazing experience. Honestly, I kind of in the back of my mind knew I wanted to pursue a PhD and was a little bit burnt out from football. And so I was really just kind of using this as an opportunity to build my strength conditioning sort of skill set. And I was writing down every single thing, every little tidbit. I, created after the month of training there, I created this long document of kind of like the philosophy that I kind of took away. And so that was really impactful. And honestly, so this was October. So I trained the full month of October of 2015 with him. And then I needed to qualify for that American Open that I finished off with. So I went and did some qualifier after doing straight West Side for a month straight and did very well. Technique was a little off, but like the strength was there for sure. And so, yeah, that kind of carried into that American Open sort of an experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
I know, man.
No, it's worth hearing it because I want to hear all the stuff because you have such a different array of background in sports and everything. And the cool thing, and I think it ties into like what you ended up doing for your bachelor's, your master's, and your doctorate program. You had a really good job of balancing everything, and you were doing weightlifting all the time. Same time you were doing all your collegiate like strength conditioning for football and preparation. And there's no doubt about it that all your competitive experience working with Phil and your dad and just growing up and doing multiple different sports really prepared you for those 3-day, that mini camp. And it's probably where a lot of people kind of falter in that in time. Like, you've got 3 days to get exposed and then either see if you're going to thrive or just survive. And if you're only competing for 5 spots, survivors don't matter. You really have to excel in those positions. So that's really cool to hear. And I'm jealous you got to work at Westside, but my invite's never coming. So, but it's great to kind of see how you took a lot of information from that. Same thing from your American Open. And those are things I want to get into with all your coaching experience and everything leading into your research studies and stuff. But before we kind of get into that, like, I really wanted to talk to you a little bit because I'm intrigued by like your promise that you had for yourself, like gaining the weight and everything. And I think that's a huge thing with not just football players, but since they manipulate their weight a lot, even wrestlers, like having been in a restrictive zone for a long period of time, like that transition out of either professional sports or the collegiate atmosphere and stuff like that. How's your training been different since retiring from football? I know you're doing a lot of different stuff, and you've mentioned you've got into cycling and doing some other things and getting back in the weight room. But how has it been different from the pro lineman training up until now with what you're currently doing?
Yeah. I've definitely learned a lot. Like, I think one of the biggest things that stands out is, strength and power development out of weight training was just the one and only goal, really. And then, afterwards, and even it helps through personal training where, that's kind of a supplementary job for myself, is just kind of realizing that like a ton of, there's a ton of other goals besides just strength and power development. So that was kind of an eye opener. But kind of just to make a note on like what you were saying about having so many things going on at once. I think that's just my type of personality where I get bored with, with a one single sort of mindset sort of thing. And so I need a lot of things going on, and that just brings flavor to my life. And I think that's something I can't do without, it keeps me level headed. I think, going into research and doing that research, typing behind a computer 8 hours a day, or, sometimes it'd be 8 hours a day, but like, oh man, I think, just by doing that, I could just tell my mood, my person was so different, not being able to release all that energy. And so what I kind of realized is I built up this massive, engine to do work throughout my years of a, athlete. And then, abruptly stopping or abruptly not having some vigorous activity, I don't know, made this dynamic where, I don't have, I'm not my best self unless I get some of that vigorous, hard exercise in. And so like, I've really just made a point just for even mental clarity to kind of routinely work that in. But kind of going now on that transition of working out of football, I can't exactly think when I started the kind of weight loss journey, because I think for a little while there, I think I was just taking a break for a few months. And by taking a break, I mean, I was still weightlifting heavy and kind of doing that sort of thing. But I wasn't kind of getting after any specific goal. And then finally, I think it might, I think one random New Year's, I made a New Year's resolution to get a pair of abs. It sounds silly to the idea, but, just kind of with that knowledge that I was kind of a fat kid growing up, I want to try out a pair of abs. I want to see what the hype's about. And so, it's kind of an arbitrary, where do you stop sort of goal, but it was just to my own content. And I'm never one to kind of like put that asterisk like, oh yeah, it's kind of abs or something like that. It's like, I want someone to look and be like, yep, definitively, you know, you reached that goal. So that was my first big goal of the year. And I think just to even touch on like New Year's resolutions, like I think it's kind of like a frivolous sort of, you know, like there's that kind of stigma that's like, oh, why, you know, nobody ever keeps them. Like, why even? And it's just like, I think I look for a reason to include mental toughness training into my life, because I think that's so important. And I think, you know, honestly, I haven't had that many life stressors to kind of develop me into what I have, but what really might have hardened me or developed the toughness that I have is kind of these physical things, you know. So being around Phil and doing 5 days a week of being uncomfortable under a bar is really kind of what found your, you know, the foundation of, you know, my ability. And then, so I just wanted to keep that going. And so I love any sort of an excuse to make some random mental toughness training sort of thing. I'm kind of a masochist when it comes to like, you know, just, you know, not to a bad degree, but just like, I love to take away candy for a month or, you know, do something that's like my favorite. And it's like, okay, let's see how you do a month without it. And so, yeah, weight loss was the first one. I think I took a very interesting strategy to do weight loss. It was all behavioral, you know, behavioral based. And so the idea behind that is that as a, you know, high level football player and being about 305, 315 pounds, the urge of being hungry was a horrible indication that you're going to be losing weight on the scale, you know, in the upcoming, you know, day or two. And so literally the feeling of hungry spouted off a alert saying like, okay, you need to get something in right now. And, you know, you're not in this kind of safe, like get something. And so just being okay with being hungry was such a massive behavioral change for me. And so to kind of train that, I guess, I incorporated intermittent fasting. You know, I understand there's a lot of, you know, cool research coming out about the physiological and sort of those sort of advantages of it, but I was strictly, you know, not strictly, but majority was just for a behavioral change out of myself. And so that was really a massive thing, that and portion sizes. So just kind of being able to be content with only having one hamburger instead of 2-3 hamburgers was honestly one of the bigger challenges, and still is a challenge for me. But one interesting nuance with that kind of diet was I would program cheat meals, you know, throughout. So probably about once a week I would have a cheat meal just to kind of give myself a psychological boost in the weight room or whatever sort of training I was doing at the time, just because a caloric deficit is so mentally draining, especially if you haven't been there before. So I thought that was a great nuance to keep the motivation in the weight room, you know, whatever training I was doing. And so I successfully got that by my own standards. I got my set of abs, you know, it was, I don't know, you know, I don't, it was only, I don't know. So for all of these goals, you're the first person, you know, I'm kind of publicly telling about this. I don't post to my Facebook or anything like that, just to kind of make sure my ego stays in check. I think too many people make these New Year's resolutions and post a little bit of progress, and, you know, it's just letting their ego get in the way. So I just truly wanted to do it for myself. Yeah. And so I successfully did that by my own standards. You know, I probably didn't get to the beach anytime that year, but I at least got my goal. And I think that year bicycling became a big mode of exercise because I was trying to do the weight loss. And honestly, one of the interesting things is how your hunger changes with like anaerobic type, really resistance training type work. Like you get hungry, as I've been doing this last year. When you train a lot in the weight room, you get hungry, but like that doesn't necessarily occur with like aerobic type cycling sort of work. So that was a good way of, getting that calorie loss. And so I started to commute to work just about every day on my bicycle, which is about 8-mile round trip. And so, I mean, it's just nice. And like the psychological sort of de-stressor is amazing. Yeah, but that kind of led into the next year's goal, which was to cycle 5,000 miles in a year, which breaks down to about 13 miles a day. And so that was my massive goal of the year. And that really forced me to neglect weightlifting for the first time in my life. And honestly, I was kind of willing to do that just because it had been such a staple in my life. And, I'm always trying to keep my ego in check. I think that's one thing that leads people to failure too quickly is their ego gets them to think that they're better than what they are, and then they don't work as hard, sort of a deal. So, that's the reason why that's an additional reason why I kind of neglected some of the weight training. It's just like, is it my ego just wanting to continue to be the strongest guy in a weight room and just kind of like lift big weights in front of people? Or is there something intrinsic about the weightlifting that draws me in? And so by neglecting it, I kind of discovered the following year what the answer to that was. But as far as the cycling goes, it started out pretty poor. It was one of the coldest, worst freaking spring, winters, whatever you'll imagine. But I got, I kind of maintained. I'm like, okay, but I was kind of behind the average. So I'm about, I need to make up time somewhere, maybe during the heat of summer. And then I did RAGBRAI that year, which is a bicycle ride across Iowa from west to east end. And it was about 450 miles in 7 days. And that helped me kind of get back on track. And then for the final months of, so that was in July. So August through December, I averaged about 500 miles on my bike each month and got my goal with 100 plus miles on it. And, it was all outdoor miles. So none of that on a trainer sort of crap. I think one cool, like I'm saying, I just kind of masochist about mental toughness training. I think I can't let the weather dictate my decisions. So it's like, are you going to bicycle today? Well, let's see if the weather decides if it's okay for me to go outside. It's like, no, you're your own person. You can put an extra hat, an extra coat, just because it's uncomfortable shouldn't be any excuse for you to decide whether or not you're going to do something or not. So I think that was a massive thing that I really enjoyed that I built is that, okay, it's blizzarding out. Okay, get on that damn bike and pedal my 4 miles in. So yeah, that was a really good goal. A side thing that happened from that. So 5,000 miles on a bicycle, my bike, everybody's bike breaks down over that course. And so throughout that year, I developed a pretty decent, okay skill in bicycle maintenance, which I kind of love that I have right now. I can just about do every single part on my bicycle with comfort. And I think that was one of the nuances to that goal that I didn't anticipate, but I really loved. So like a lot of these year-long goals, you don't really know all of the stressors or all the benefits that'll come from it. And I love that learning thing where, one of the downsides of bicycling for that much time was how many hours I had to spend on the seat of that bicycle. And that really, it sometimes took away from hanging out with friends. It sometimes, a lot of the times it took away from weightlifting. And so it was just one of those unanticipated things that went along with that kind of long-term difficult goal. Finally getting to this year's New Year's resolution. I acknowledge, I was happy. I was very content with my cycling goal, and I realized that I neglected weightlifting and I was feeling weaker. And so I jumped back into a weightlifting goal. And that was, I wanted to bench 300, squat 400, and deadlift 500, just because that's an arbitrary kind of set of standards that is kind of known throughout, it's like, oh, that's kind of a baseline standard of strong for at least some people. And so that's been my goal this entire year. There's a lot of interesting things that kind of went along with it. I think first off, cycling 5,000 miles had some morphological changes in my body where, I mostly noticed it kind of at my hip tilt, where a great squat kind of favors that anterior hip tilt, not excessive, but then the cycling really promotes posterior pelvic tilt by being kind of crunched on that bicycle. And really, when you produce power on a bicycle, you pull yourself into this crunch position. So you're really shortening that kind of anterior of yourself. And so I distinctly noticed a lot of pain in my squat initially in that year. And so I had a lot of kind of hip pains going on that I had to kind of PT by myself to get kind of towards my goal. So I was almost using a empty barbell / kettlebell squats, sort of your goblet squat sort of exercises at the beginning of the year, just to kind of PT and get that thing right. And in addition to that, I had a bum shoulder because I was cycling one spring morning with my buddy out by the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi River washes mud and crap along the sidewalk. And so I didn't realize that, and I kind of went into that and immediately slipped out, kind of had to crash onto my shoulder, and it banged me up for a minute. That was bad for, that day for sure. And then, I had a decent amount of pain for a while in it. And so I had to be a PT guy for the first 3 months, I would say, of this year. I was PTing my shoulder and my hip. And then, that was one of those kind of nuances that I didn't realize I would gain after kind of this goal. And I love the interesting selection and kind of the nuance of PT style to kind of alleviate those pains. And then after that, I've just been kind of on a mostly like a linear progression up towards my current phase of training. So I kind of did a linear progression through that middle phase of the year. And now I'm kind of approaching that final month. I think I'm really within near shot of my attempts. I hit 365 for a triple beltless, a couple weeks ago. And, I don't know. So I think it's just at least in shot. And so at least with this current, I'd say block of training, I'm trying to incorporate kind of a circa max phase, which Westside popularized, which is just basically using band tension to provide accommodative resistance to the barbell. And really what I get from that is I learned how to drive through sticking points. And honestly, I'm giving that kind of bottom transition phase of my lifts kind of a break, because there's no band tension at that bottom transition of the lift. And so it really allows you to kind of control that bottom and fire out from that bottom position. So I'm digging this last phase going, so I'm very hopeful for this, remaining, what is it? Freaking 21 days left of the year that I got to fill this.
I know. I think you're gearing up. Hopefully you hit those numbers.
I'm pumped. I'm on track.
No, that's cool.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, but that's kind of the point. I don't want to make a goal that I know I can get. I want to I want to make a goal. Okay, I know I can get this. Now go about 10 or 20% more than that goal. And if I make it, awesome. If I don't make it, well, I made a freaking tough goal, it's understandable. So I'm pretty content right now with how everything's been going with that.
No, that's great advice, because I think even if you don't obtain a goal that you kind of set out of reach and it's 20% more than what you can do, you're still going to fall within obtaining what you thought was possible first. So why not shoot for a little bit more and challenge yourself? And I really like what you talk about with the mental toughness stuff and finding ways to throw that in there. And it's pretty cool to see, because even if it's not physically enduring and what you're doing now, with some of your lifting goals and everything, it's a completely different goal at your body weight and what you were doing when you were playing football and everything. And I think that's great advice for any athlete transitioning out of playing a team sport or doing a strength sport. Your goals are going to change. You're probably never going to be hitting a new quote unquote all-time PR, but for your body weight or for what you're intending to do, and now you're trying to balancing cycling into it and setting new goals and stuff. I think that's awesome. And people kind of get lost in the weeds with setting goals and PRs and everything, and they do make it kind of ego related rather than it's for you personally. You don't need to put it out for everybody. And if you're the type of person that's intrinsically motivated and you're going to hold yourself to that goal and challenge yourself all the time, then it doesn't need to be ego related, and your goal can be whatever you need it to be, which is awesome. But I really like just everything you talk about, learning through experience.
Dude, I think that's the fundamental, if there's one takeaway of this, I hope it's just people will try, I think it is an ego thing where people aren't comfortable with too many losses, So that's such a major thing to consider when you program is how well does this guy cope with, doing difficult things? It's at least some of my clients, I can't give them just very, working on their weaknesses, just picking this low-hanging fruit, because they're not very good at it. They got to do stuff that they know that they're good at. So it kind of gives them a win in their mind. And I think the more that you can be content with handling losses and handling, just kind of that developmental phase, I think the quick cope with, handling losses or challenging, putting yourself kind of in that deep water before you're ready sort of idea.
No, I think that's great. I think a lot of people kind of lose sight of that too with training, and training should build confidence. You're not, even West Side and powerlifting and everything, there's a reason Conjugate rotates bars and does all those things all the time. So you can build up personal records within those things and then build confidence when you go back to your competition lifts.
Definitely.
And college strength conditioning, professional strength conditioning, same way. You shouldn't be failing every single time you're in the weight room. That does put a psychological toll on someone. And the whole goal is to make sure that what you're doing in the weight room hopefully translates over to the field, and not just physically, mentally and psychologically. If you can do that stuff, then those athletes are going to be in a better position. So that's that's cool to see how that stuff ties in. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into next, because I know you had an extensive athletic background, but you also have a very extensive educational background too. So kind of how did you get into your position being like with your doctorate and being a sports data analyst and everything? What was there a defining moment in your career you talked about where you knew you wanted to do your PhD and you're kind of getting burned off with the the NFL? But like when you first got to UNI, did you know you wanted to kind of be in the exercise science realm, or what kind of piqued your interest with all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to go back, Phil Johnson 100% instilled in me that I wanted strength coach. Like strength coach was definitely my goal. I'd say collegiate strength coach was my goal for the longest time. Through that high school years, one of the things that he built, I can't applaud him enough for the atmosphere that he created, which is like, one of the biggest keys, I think, in, creating a learning setting. But, he gave me all these books to read. I was reading, Charles Poliquin, what's his name? The guy that said the death to the squat guy. What's his name?
Oh man, now I'm blanking on him too.
I know, right? But yeah, the Boston, so like I was just reading a lot of good fundamental strength training books at that age. And one of the coolest things that I got into at that gym at that time was these conversations of strength training conversations, probably where you can totally resonate with, where like I just loved having these like conversations about kind of gray areas in strength and conditioning and how to kind of solve it. You never solve it, but you at least create ideas. And I think that was an amazing experience. I've always wanted to kind of get back into a setting that casually has those awesome conversations again. So yeah, I was totally strength coach mindset until I kind of got to college and really witnessed the collegiate strength coach time. And there's just a lot of tough parts of being a strength coach. The time constraint is so incredibly big. And like the scarcity of jobs, like having a master's degree doesn't necessarily set you apart anymore in this strength conditioning realm. And on top of that, like I said, Phil really got in me that I wanted to have enough time in my life to do these peripheral sort of activities, go traveling, go mountain biking. And so I thought, well, the current strength coach position doesn't allow that very easily to happen. So what can I do to set myself apart, be in this realm, but, also have some more flexibility built into it. And luckily, I had an amazing sport biomechanics professor. His name was Travis Ficklin, and he was my master's degree advisor. But I think he was the person that really inspired me for a PhD 100%. One, I think biomechanics. So biomechanics made me realize that I already had kind of a knack for math growing up. I was always kind of in those like advanced maths, but like that's not exactly where my interest laid. And so that was a cool way to incorporate math into exercise science to where I've never really seen it done much before. And on top of that, as a teacher, Dr. Ficklin had an amazing knack at presenting very difficult concepts very elegantly, simply through kind of analogy. And I thought that was amazing because biomechanics, like this distant kind of like looking into it, it looks intimidating. And like, that's kind of one of the notorious classes people are kind of intimidated to get into. But having like that teacher to have that knack of being able to present things elegantly and simply, was just so inspiring to me. And so, yeah, I would just kind of accredit that kind of experience to me wanting a PhD. We kind of figured that out in my last year or two of college. And as far as, I thought I've always wanted to be, a sports scientist title. And so I applied to just various PhD programs that were funded. And honestly, I kind of believe in fate a little bit, where like the one person that accepted me ended up being a great fit for me, because it gave me the flexibility to kind of choose the topic I wanted to present. And so, on the surface level, I got into a biomedical engineering PhD, position. And, I thought at very least, I want to work on my weaknesses. So, I've spent this last 10 years really honing in on my strength conditioning sort of skill set. And now I'm deficient at this kind of analytics sort of portion of sport biomechanist. So I thought biomedical engineering was a perfect thing to throw me into the deep end of my own weakness and like get proficient at that. As far as so the topic that kind of really gave me the grant money to go to school at the University of Iowa was a grant from the military to create these predictive injury models for soldiers. But military data is really difficult to get a hold of. Even though they gave us money to pursue the grant, we could barely get any sort of good data from them. But what we did have was a strength coach from the Olympic sports at the University of Iowa within our group, and he was able to share quite a bit of the Olympic sports data. So I was dealing with sport data and trying to do the predictive injury modeling for the entire time there. And just kind of the relationship that we had at the PhD level. There's some, sometimes advisors are really on top of you and, tell you kind of where to go and what to pursue. And then at the polar opposite end is my advisor, and so what he did was, he gave me the, it's like, this is the topic, find what you think is most worthy to, go after. And then I really didn't have much communication throughout the whole process voluntarily. I'm sure if I went to him, he would have insight. But I think one of the interesting aspects is that I'm kind of this performance sport scientist, and I'm dealing with a large group of strictly engineers. I've got like optimization engineers, robotics engineers, mathematic type people. So those are their expertises. So it's really not easy to kind of pick their brain about these like very sport context sort of problems. And then from that, I kind of found my own niche within the topic, which was creating metrics to help define player movement quality, or what I called it was biomechanics or biomechanical fatigue. And then I just kind of created two. I basically I'll lay out kind of the basis of like the PhD. And so within this athlete health modeling, the idea is to get as wide of a domain of metrics as possible, because there's so many different things that influence athlete health. So just by, collecting player workload metrics does not, properly assess the peripheral stresses that goes into it. And so kind of surveying this full domain of what's normally collected, I saw that biomechanics was completely deficient just because of the difficulty of kind of doing those tests within a team setting. like we were talking before this podcast, and like there's so many team constraints. You know, in my experience, we had to weigh in for football every day, get on the top of the scale, and just do that super simple. You stand on a scale for 10 seconds, and even the compliance issues with that would be surprising to someone outside of sports. So compliance is a massive hurdle to get over in kind of that team setting. And so I wanted to take some of the well-developed biomechanical proxies that have been developed over the years, but really can't be incorporated into these team settings because of these team constraints. And then I wanted to use kind of modern wearable technologies and complex modeling skills to adapt these old school proxies to be able to be collected within a team setting without any compliance issues.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like I know you understand it too, just living it as well in the college setting, and then once you get to the pros, there are so many different rules that go into it. Like compliance is one of the big ones. That you pretty much make your own decisions when you get to that level. So it's a little bit different if an athlete even wants that data being put out. And I know I don't know how it is always in like the NFL, but like Major League Baseball, they're not allowed to wear wearables. Like that's just in their contract. They can't have any of those things. So it's cool to be able to see what are things that universally could be used in that context, but even more so to like hear how you have interacted with different experts in it to actually compile all the research is awesome. And I looked into the virtual like soldier project, and I think it's awesome. But yeah, it's definitely hard to get any of that information away from the military. That they keep that pretty close to chest. But so like with all the research and everything too, like does that kind of been impacted from like your competitive background? Like, is that some of the reasons why you wanted to do kind of the fatigue models and everything? Like just like your own personal experience, is that what kind of pushed you towards that topic?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely going into biomechanics, like that was just kind of one of my selfish things that I wanted to get good at, or specialties that I wanted to have was biomechanics. So I'm like, okay, let's dive into bio. And luckily, there was a massive need for biomechanics, so it aligned well. Um, Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, so looking at it too, I know you took a little different approach. Like originally you wanted to be a coach and you had a lot of time. I know you were personal training with your masters too, like working within the Olympic side when you were there as well, coaching. Is that something you kind of would recommend for someone else, or like what would you say to someone interested in like maybe the sports science realm for human performance, or just starting out, maybe not necessarily looking into a PhD, but maybe down the line? What would you say to someone interested in like the sports performance, like sports science, data analyst side?
Yeah, I would say that it's a premature field. So like, um, so basically, teams aren't necessarily realizing that that's a role that needs to be, on every team almost. I think they're slowly realizing it because like, teams have been collecting these, large vats of data for almost a decade for a lot of teams, but then, they default to this reductionist sort of way of seeing what's worth, getting information from. So that's kind of where you have to have someone with that kind of modeling background to make more complex sense, because human adaptation shouldn't be simple, or it isn't simple. So why should you model it simply? I think that's a major disconnect people have, is like it's one of the most complex things, innumerable amount of factors that deal into it. So don't, take it lightly as far as modeling it simply. As far as people trying to get into it, Yeah, I think it's a growing field. So I think there's going to be a growing number of positions available in the near future. I think, it's interesting to see, just as I'm job prospecting right now, how much analytics is involved in each sport. And it really ranges kind of based on the culture of the sport, where I'd say baseball, just kind of like that Moneyball movie that came out recently. They definitely lead the pack in team sport analytics. And then, it kind of goes down after, there's basketball, then football. And then I even applied for professional hockey. What I found out was they're so, like culturally, they are not ready for a lot of the data analytics that are here. So it's just kind of cool to see where the state is in as far as like what people want out of data analytics. But if you're trying to get into it, I think strength conditioning is, a great thing to have. But I think the earlier the better, where you can start incorporating analytics is, ideal, because I would say I kind of got heavily into my analytics background about 4.5 years ago, and I'm still developing a lot. It's kind of, there's these cliches of like 10,000 hour rule to become an expert. And it's like, you just need to put that time under tension and, working really hard for 4.5 years. I just need more time under tension. I'm good. I I got a great skill set in that 4.5 years, but boy, is it a vast field I'm getting into. So I think earlier the better, of just immersing yourself and trying things. I think books are great to kind of get yourself familiar with the realm, but I think nothing will ever replace doing it. And I think that goes for everything, we can possibly talk about on this podcast, whether it be training, whether it be coaching, nothing can replace actually doing it.
I couldn't agree more. But that's great advice. And I know in the college realm too, and even professionally, they're starting to get those hybrid models too. And I think it's a good kind of transition to start seeing that there is like this information is pertinent and it's helpful. But then you start getting into, okay, is this a 50-50 split between a coach and a data analyst? And then you're kind of half-assing two things. And I think some places, like I know University of Iowa has sports science, and they have that department specifically for it. And I think some of the results kind of show, and those are the forefront runners for those collegiate and professional ones. I think that model will start to kind of play a bigger role later down the line, and it'll trickle down to the other divisions and maybe high school later on. But that's great advice to hear for anybody kind of looking into it. So, hey, we finished the show with like any good training session with a good finisher. So get you a little bit prepped for your max lifts going into the end of the year. So we got 4 quarters and 4 questions and maybe a little overtime here. So take as much time as you want, or you can respond as quickly as you want. Just fire them away. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. So biggest influence in the sports science research realm, and then favorite athlete growing up.
All right. Well, I'm going to say my biggest influence was Phil Johnson. I think he just set me up with a holistic, mindset that really I've been tapping into throughout my entire life. So I think that totally goes to him. As for the favorite athlete, like I was saying, my dad is this old school football coach, blah blah blah, and Dick Butkus. Even though I never got to see him play, my dad would just preach about how nasty and mean and like how good of a player he was, and like I just really loved that old school mental toughness, sort of like you see that guy on the field and you get scared. You're an opponent, you get scared, which shouldn't happen, sort of an idea. And so I love that guy.
I
And
like it.
actually, here's an interesting. I got coached by one of his nephews or whatever at Jacksonville.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Luke Budkiss. He was a screamer on the field. He was a cool dude, but
That's crazy. That's
yeah,
crazy.
cool.
Some of those coaching trees are nuts, especially in
I
the
know.
family.
Yeah. It's a small world once you kind of like, get into that level.
Definitely. Hey, so I know you got a little more free time. You're on the job hunt right now, but with dissertation done, and I know you talked a little bit about cycling, but what other hobbies you kind of doing when you're not working on sports science stuff? And now that your dissertation's done, what are you kind of doing?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that, occupies my time, thankfully, is my two kids. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old right now. Well, he'll be 3 years old in January 5th. So he's about 3. So yeah, those two kids, both boys, they're a mess of energy, and, they're huge kids, just kind of like myself. So they're beating the crap out of me whenever they get the chance. And so I think that's a great time to, like, in general, I think during this PhD, like, at least during the like low, when I wasn't doing homework and all that sort of stuff, kind of in this past year or two, I really haven't had to do a full-time job's worth of stuff at PhD. So it's given me a lot of flexibility to be with my kids. And I think that's one of the biggest treats of kind of this moment in life is like, I realized that once I'm done with this phase, I got a 40-hour work week at least, coming up. So like, I really enjoyed the flexibility of this time. In addition to the kids, just been going to see all my friends recently. I think that's one of the things I love is just I have a bunch of friends, like you say, I've got all these different hobbies or whatever. I've got a friend group for each hobby because there's not, like a lot of my weightlifting friends hate cycling. A lot of my cycling friends have never touched a weight. And so like I've got all these kind of groups of friends, and like I love to just use traveling as an excuse to go see them and rekindle those relationships. And that's been a huge pleasure. I just got back last weekend from a great weekend going to see a buddy, climbing with another buddy, cycling with a buddy, and then seeing my Jake Pudens. He's been mentioned on this podcast. He's an Olympic weightlifting buddy that really started that first culture with Phil Johnson. And so like just seeing everybody has been so good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he lives within that coaching tree. Everybody at Georgetown knows him for sure.
Heck yeah. He's great, man. He's been a best friend of mine for, since that kind of high school experience. Where interesting nuance with him is the first time I met him, he came to Phil's gym and his mouth was wired shut because he was a MMA fighter, pro MMA fighter, and he got his jaw broke. And so he's this big, scary-looking dude with a wired mouth shut. I'm just like, holy crap, this guy is interesting. But, oh, man, do we have a great relationship. And, he was an amazing friend to develop over time.
That's great. Hey, so if you could pick a different career, like now that you're in this kind of realm, I kind of know what it might be, but what is there something else that kind of piques your interest that you might have chosen a different path?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, like I think a straight up strength coach is, really calls me. I think one aspect within that is I love the kind of touch point or the closeness with the athletes, kind of that pedagogy sort of nuance to it where, you got to read your athlete and kind of develop these relationships and kind of, I don't know. I think that is super, super rewarding that I hope to incorporate in my future career, you know.
Yeah, I can agree to that. So what is if you had an ideal training day, and it might be different from cycling, it might be different from weightlifting, what's your go-to like PR song or music, and what's the post-training meal look like now when you're not on a no candy for a month?
Yeah.
What's the go-to?
So yeah, I at least know I thought, you know, because like I've heard these fourth quarters, I've been listening to a bunch of your podcasts. I think the nostalgic Pancheros burrito is just a tremendous go-to post-workout. Throw in some chips and queso with that. Can't beat that. For my Pandora, so like for my music, I would go to Pandora. I'm kind of old school. Like I wish I kept up better with music, but I just stick with those Pandora stations and do that. So if I'm hitting PRs, I'm either probably going for Rage Against the Machine radio or Tool radio.
There you go. Hey, so last one I got for you for overtime, and it can be whatever sport you kind of think. What is the most memorable or your favorite either under the bar experience, like in training, either competition or game that's kind of stuck with you forever?
Game. Yeah. Oh man. I think, you know, I'll try and split it up to maybe one or two. I think my first time and maybe my only time, I snatched 315 pounds in my collegiate weight room. And like I was saying, our collegiate weight room let us progress to, you know, max out singles in Olympic lifting, you know, by the end of, you know, whatever training phase. And, you know, it was off season, whatever, but like, oh, I got hungry when I, you know, got to that max out phase, and I hit a 315 snatch. I hit 400-pound split jerk for a triple, 405, and then I don't know. Yeah, probably like a 370 for clean and jerk. So yeah, yeah, awesome for that. And then for like, you know, team sports, I think that moment, you know, that 3-day mini camp stands out to me as probably one of the best, most rewarding things. And then just kind of individual plays after that where, there's this one guy from South Dakota, I believe. So, you know, here's a fun story to finish this podcast with maybe. So, you know, South Dakota, we're playing in their dome. First play of the game, you know, it's just a backside power play where I don't do much in the play. I basically step inside and shield my defensive end outside of the play. And so there's not much responsibility. And so the play's gone, you know, the runner's gone by, and, you know, the guy has his hand on my throat and he's really trying to press hard against my throat. And I kind of like, you know, what are you doing? I kind of slap it down and I'm like, are you, you know, was that accident? You know, not saying it that nicely, but like, you know, was this an accident or, you know, or what's going on? And he just like looked at me and he's like, all day, baby, all day, you know, just trying to like set the tone sort of bull crap. And so the next play, you know, thank goodness for fate or whatever, they called a kind of kick slide pass play to my side to where I kicked out, and my defensive end or my guy dropped back out of the play. And so I looked inside, And that guy who wanted to set the tone on me was sitting there kind of, running his stuff against our guard. And so I went in and cleaned his frickin' clock, like head over heels, put him on the ground. And I got in his face and I'm like, hey, man, get up. This is just the beginning. Get your, and I'll tell you, I was a little bit more profane during this time, but I'm like, hey, man, get up. This is just the beginning. You asked for this. Come on. And so, I don't know. I think overall, I'm the type of football player that, I won't talk to you. You don't talk to me. We'll have a great game. But if you infringe upon me, I will go out of my way to ruin this freaking game for you. And so from that, couple plays in, I did my job to freaking ruin his day, and I did a good job. So that was a really fun moment where, at least I had the ability to take those types of people into my own hands.
Yeah, that one will stick with you for a while.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And those are impressive numbers too to be doing in a college weight room as well. That's awesome.
I mean, shit, when you start with Phil back in sophomore year of high school, I mean, it is good number, at least for myself, but time under tension, man, you get decent.
Yeah, it was bound to happen. I mean, there's a good pedigree from the Johnson brothers, so I wouldn't doubt that was bound to happen. Hey, but Jack, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been great to chat with you. I mean, everything from all your different sports experience, like your education background, everything, and seeing how both of those are intertwined together. I know the audience is going to love listening to this. And again, thank you for taking some time out to come on the show today, man.
Yeah, I've honestly loved my journey, and I love where it's taking me. I want to thank you, man. I think this was an awesome opportunity. I think this is a super cool concept of a podcast, and I think best of luck to you in the progression of this going forward.
I appreciate that, man. And thanks for listening and again for being on today. So take care, bud.
Absolutely. See ya.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.